Okay,
Hi
we're back.
everyone, I think we're back now. The best laid plans and my anxiety did go up, I have to say, when that went down with the Wi-Fi. But hopefully we're back now, and gradually everyone might be able to reconnect. So I was just talking before about the concept of resilience and trying to develop that sense of mental toughness in our children, and how we can show them that perseverance is really important and not giving up. So that brings us to that whole COVID-19 experience that we're currently in the midst of, and hopefully coming towards the end of it. This experience it's quite a unique time in history, really. So if we can consider this COVID-19 time as an opportunity to build resilience in our children, I think we can really help our children develop that concept of resilience. So what we want to do is, whenever there's a big crisis or a big issue in our world, it can be really helpful to focus on the positives that come out of it. So rather than being smashed with the social media and the news coverage that talks about all the negative sides of things, it's okay to have some of that, but to make sure that we're really focusing on the things that are really positive as well. So the kindness that neighbour to neighbour, or across different communities, the amazing job that people who work in supermarkets and deliveries, and of course the medical professionals that are caring for everyone and setting things up. There's a lot to be very impressed about, and to actually feel confidence in our community. So trying to focus on some of those positives when things are quite scary and dealt with a lot in the media can be really positive to help kids feel more confident about the situation. So when we are trying to develop that environment for kids where they feel less anxious, because kids do look to parents first and foremost to know how to react to a situation. So if we can kind of have that outlook ourselves, where it's okay, we know how to stay safe in this situation, make sure that we're monitoring their exposure to social media and news, talking about getting good exercise each day, connecting even remotely with friends, trying to avoid too much technology though, and having some old-fashioned kind of games as well included. They can all be really powerful experiences. Even doing things like creating a time capsule for children, because when they're adults, people are going to go, oh, you lived through that time where you couldn't go out, you couldn't do things like you normally would in a day. Schools were shut down for a little while, and everyone was doing remote learning. So they're the kinds of things that when you look back on that's quite an interesting experience. And so seeing this as something unique can help to build resilience as well. Now, some kids, oh sorry, did
I just asked
a question? Yeah, so if you've got any questions about any of this, just mention it on the chat page, and Lisa will just let me know if one of those has come up, and I can answer it. So some kids will be a little bit more resilient naturally than others. Some kids just have naturally a more optimistic temperament, might be more even-keeled in terms of emotions. But the good thing is that you can actually teach self-regulation. So it might take a bit more time for some kids to learn some of these skills and to help them feel more socially connected with others, which also is a protective feature in building resilience. But you can also help kids to learn to become more independent as well, and that helps them feel more confident to be able to face different situations. So that greater confidence builds self-esteem as well. Another really interesting thing that has been found in research that helps develop resilience is developing a sense of empathy towards others. So if we can kind of encourage our kids to help others, consider what it might be like to walk in someone else's shoes, those sorts of empathic, helpful behaviours, that actually helps our kids to feel more resilient as well, because they tend to feel more confident that they know and proud of themselves that they've been able to help others. So that can be helpful. In terms of trying to work out what's normal and what's not, that can be quite challenging, particularly when you come to the teenage years, because mood swings can be, you know, I've got 2 teenagers, mood swings can certainly be present at that stage of life. So trying to work out, you know, is it something I need to worry about, or is it something that it's just a passing phase, can be quite tricky. But the key thing is that if there's a significant change that in the way they are thinking, feeling and behaving, and that sort of change seems to be persistent and it's interfering in their ability to enjoy life. They're the key things that need to be present if it's actually something that you need to take pretty seriously and consider what options you might have to support your children. So basically, anxiety, if it's getting in the way of them leading a normal life and a well-functioning life, and it's getting in the way of their happiness and their ability to be with friends and do school and you know, just the daily functioning of life, then that's where you really want to look at options for what you can do better, I guess, to support them.
Now, just jumping in,
Yep.
Tricia's asking if this presentation is mainly for parents, or would our students benefit from watching this presentation tonight as well?
Okay. It is targeted at parents. There are certain things that would be helpful probably to kids as well, like just this initial part, which is about understanding anxiety and what happens to the brain and body during an experience of anxiety. So you're certainly welcome to have kids. There's nothing that's not for kids only, but it has probably been targeted more for parents, because we talk about strategies for parents to support kids as well. But I think it could still be helpful. But that is actually a good question. Okay, so one of the things that is part of knowing how to manage anxiety is firstly understanding what actually happens to the brain and body when you're experiencing anxiety. First and foremost, anxiety is actually a good thing. We don't want to get rid of it in its entirety, because it actually serves a really important purpose and it can be quite useful to protect us. So if we don't get anxious about things, then we're not going to slow down when we reach towards the end of the cliff, or we're not going to actually study when we've got an exam coming up or an assessment coming up. It helps us hone our concentration and it helps us to be motivated to do something. So it only becomes problematic when it actually starts spilling over and taking over, and it stops you doing the things that you really want to do. So what actually happens in that situation is the brain actually perceives danger when there isn't any actual danger. So first, as parents, we need to manage our own anxiety about a situation, because kids really feed off the anxiety that we would be demonstrating. And we want kids to really understand why they're feeling anxious, and that there is what we call a curve. So where, you know, down one side, if we've got the level of anxiety, and across here is our performance on the x-axis, if we're having anxiety, more anxiety actually leads to peak performance for a little while. But then if we keep increasing our anxiety, our performance actually drops. And so that's what we actually don't want. We want our anxiety to be just at a level that manages it helps us to really focus our attention, protect us, but not overwhelm us. So thinking about the way the brain works, it's really important probably the simplest way to think of it is that there's the old brain and then there's the new brain that sort of sits on top. The old brain is really where your amygdala and your flight, fight survival instincts and your breathing, all of those, and the emotion center of the brain kind of is. And then we've got the new brain, which sits on top, which is where our logical thinking, reasoning, ability to have empathy towards others, making sort of connections between different events, that's that higher order reasoning and logical thinking part. When the brain is triggered thinking that there's some sort of danger because it perceives danger, and remember, the brain doesn't see any difference between a physical threat and a psychological threat. So it's just whatever threat it perceives, it goes into this fight-flight response, which is developed in our bodies to protect us. And it was developed really to protect us from a physical threat. So if there was some big physical threat, like a bear chasing us, I don't know if there's any bears around, but we have two options basically. We can run away, which is flight, or we can, if it's too late to run away, we might just have to do fight. So either way, you need certain things to happen to your body to be able to have the most efficient response to that situation. So what your body does, it shuts down any non-essential processes. So things like logical thinking, reasoning, all that new brain stuff, it's not really important at that point. I don't really need to know what the bear's thinking about. I just need to know I need to get away and I need to be able to protect myself from this big bear. So all your brain's resources are going into survival and keeping that emotion center going. So that's what happens, and that results in lots of physical changes in your body, like your heart rate starts increasing because your body is trying to pump more blood into your upper arms and upper leg muscles, because that's going to help you to run away or to fight. So what tends to happen is that your heart's pounding more to be able to provide those muscles with extra blood. You've got blood kind of coming out of your from your brain and head, like upper part of your body and your extremities, to rush into your upper arms and upper legs to be able to put more blood into those muscles to make them more efficient in their running or fighting. You tend to so that might be why you can also feel a little bit lightheaded when that's happening, or your fingers get tingly because there's less blood in the extremities of your body. Other things that happen is that your digestive system slows down, so you can get a dry mouth. You might get butterflies in your stomach because of that as well. And also there's a lot more tension because you're gritting, because even if someone's going to punch you, you grit your stomach, so you're gritting all your muscles to reduce the likelihood of being hurt. So there's all sorts of things that are happening, and you can basically explain every single symptom, that your physical symptom of anxiety, by the body's protective response. So all of those things can be really scary to a child or any aged person experiencing high levels of anxiety. But the important message about it all is that they're all designed to protect you, not to hurt you. So this is your body's way of trying to support you in a difficult situation, because it's perceived that the brain has perceived that this situation is dangerous. And so this is what we do. So it's very similar to an adrenaline response. So if you see, people lining up to do a 100-meter race, they're all, before they actually bend down, they're all shaking their arms and legs, because if you're not moving at all, those muscles become really difficult to manage, and you're not going to perform at your peak if that just floods your body. So, sometimes just shaking it out, those sorts of behaviours can get rid of that excess energy. So it's similar to that adrenaline response. So in the classroom or at home, in different situations where you can't just shake it out, anxiety, there's lots of different behaviours that are associated with anxiety, but probably a really typical one that a lot of kids have, who, especially kids who are, it's almost like a trait, anxiety trait, is perfectionism. So kids, they find it really difficult if things aren't perfect. So they worry about, what does that mean? What do people think of me if I say something or do something that isn't right, or if I've made a mistake? And they're so restricted by that anxiety that they don't even want to try, or they just become really hysterical if something's gone wrong, and you know, their emotions are all over the place. So needing to be right, and so sometimes that results in trying to control the situation and being a micromanager, not being able to shift their thinking, not having much flexibility in their thinking. Some kids just do that shutdown thing where they just won't talk, say anything, and you can't get a word out of them. Some kids, you know, seem perfect at school and nobody would ever guess that they struggle with anxiety, but at home it really spills out because that's where they feel comfortable or safe to really kind of let it rip when it comes to being upset or having a meltdown. Typically, people who experience anxiety will avoid certain things. So the thing that they're most afraid of, they try to do whatever they can to avoid it. So some kids, that can be in things like doing a speech, or it might be about even coming to school. It might be about you know, certain places where they think that, you know, they feel uncomfortable. You know, some kids don't want to be in, for example, the city because of the crowds. Well, there's no crowds at the moment, but it can be quite, you know, situational, that what they're avoiding. Unfortunately, avoidance breeds anxiety. So the more they avoid the thing that they fear, the bigger the anxiety grows. So that can be really problematic in dealing with anxiety. It can lead to self-harm in more sort of significant, like probably older kids, and it's much more rare than typical anxiety, but that can be with some kids, that can be a behaviour as well. But anxious kids tend to be fairly stubborn because they become it's really difficult to shift that mindset, and they feel safer to, I guess, have that, you know, stick to their guns with their perspective. So with anxiety, there are probably some typical styles of thinking that can actually make it worse, or I guess exacerbate the anxiety. So one of the styles is that all or nothing, like it's either brilliant or it's terrible. I'm going to be awful at this. There's no shades of grey. Another thing that kids with anxiety tend to do is they tend to jump to conclusions a lot. So it's almost like, I can read that person's mind, or I know the worst case scenario is going to happen, and they really overestimate that probability of that worst case scenario. They often personalise things and blame themselves when things go wrong, when really there's not much evidence for it. They tend to be catastrophizing, again, worst case scenario, as I said. Emotional reasoning, because they don't feel confident about something, they kind of, you know, if they feel like, you know, embarrassed, they'll think that they're dumb, even though there's no evidence to suggest that they're not bright. But it's just because they feel that way and they're not confident, that they assume that must be how others see them as well. They tend to have a negative bias, so they only see the negative, like if, you know, 10 people, and I guess we're all, you know, susceptible to some of these things from time to time, but if 10 people gave them a compliment and one person was negative, then they would be focusing on that negative comment. So should have statements, that's also pretty commonly associated with anxiety, where I should have done that, I should, you know, and they really beat themselves up about what they perhaps should have done in hindsight. So in terms of how you can help your child who's dealing with anxiety, if they're having those sorts of thoughts, we kind of need to pull out those thoughts, help kids to actually recognise that they're having those sorts of thoughts that perhaps aren't, you know, not their logical thinking, reasoning brain, but really that self-protective emotion brain that's actually in operation. So there's two ways you can approach what to do about these thoughts, and there's two schools of thoughts around this that therapy is developed on. One is that you challenge the thoughts by trying to act like a detective and sort of look at, are these thoughts actually based in fact, or is it just that's how I'm feeling or thinking and that's why I'm having these thoughts? Because it's the way you think that actually determines how you're going to feel and then also behave. Because you can have two kids who have the exact same situation that will behave and feel a totally different way to each other. So for example, the situation might be that they do poorly on an assessment or a task of some sort. One kid's thinking, wow, I mustn't have paid attention in class, or I obviously missed something key there. I'll have to, I'll need to pay attention next time. And so what they might be feeling is disappointed or, a bit annoyed, but they're not kind of going to be doing the whole self-loathing thing. Whereas another kid might be thinking, I'm an idiot, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I never get anything right. So anyone who's thinking those sorts of extreme thoughts are going to, of course, feel way more upset, anxious, and distressed by that same situation. And so they might be more likely, rather than seek help, they might be more likely to give up and things like that. So when you're challenging thoughts, you're helping kids to identify what is that thought that is actually driving that emotion for me, and how can I decide whether, have I actually got evidence to say that thought is real? So have I got genuine evidence to say that I'm stupid or no one likes me or whatever the thought is? And using detective thinking, so what is my evidence? Could I actually convince like a jury of my peers that is actually the case? Or would they go, no, why would you think that? So that's what detective thinking is, or challenging thoughts is. Whereas the other school of thought is that rather than trying to challenge those thoughts and replace them with something more, based more on evidence, is actually accepting that I'm going to have those thoughts and not trying to get rid of them, but accepting that this is just me. I have these anxious thoughts, but rather than try and get rid of them, because sometimes the more people tell you, stop, that's not the case, the harder it is to actually get rid of those thoughts. But I'm going to accept that I'm going to have these thoughts, but I don't have to act in line with those thoughts. Like, I can behave in a way, even though I hate dentists and I'm terrified of them, rather than avoiding dentists, I can make myself go much more regularly, like every 9 months, so it's not such a big deal and then just get used to that. So I know I'm going to, every time I face that situation, I'm going to have these thoughts, but I don't have to run away from the dentist, which is what my thoughts want me to do, if I behave in a way that's consistent with those anxious thoughts, if that makes sense. Hope that makes sense. So basically, even though you're accepting that you're having those thoughts, you're committing to living your life the way you want to live it and not letting these thoughts interrupt that process. Okay, so other things, as I said, avoidance does breed anxiety, and it just makes the anxiety bigger. So sometimes it's not that we want to necessarily throw kids into the worst case scenario in terms of their anxiety, but you kind of try to build little, or scaffold, dealing with that sort of situation that they're terrified of. So you might, if there's a dog phobia, for example, you might just start off with just looking at pictures of dogs. Then you might graduate to watching videos of dogs. Then you might actually graduate to watching, visiting a dog at a house, but not going outside where the dog is, and just watching from a distance, and so on and so on. So having that scaffolded experience can really help with anxiety. But if the adults around the kids are kind of nervous as well, and it's really hard, this is easier said than done, because as a parent, our inbuilt instinct is to protect kids. It's protect our own kids. So if we are worried about their worries, and then we're sort of showing worries, or if we're anyway kind of anxious ourselves, then it's going to be really hard to manage our kids' fears without sort of seeing it through the lens of our own fears. So trying to hover around them, trying to protect them from absolutely everything, what we you probably hear called helicopter parenting, solving all their problems for them. Those sorts of things can actually do more harm than good. So also being careful, as I said before, not having too much exposure to the news and social media, because that can increase anxiety, because it's that 24/7, and they think that things are far more present than what they actually are. And so there's not that realistic balance of what's actually happening in the world. Another thing that really increases anxiety is when kids feel a sense of helplessness, or that they don't have any control over a situation, that they're just this victim in this situation, that things just happen to them and there's nothing they can do about them. So that's why independence, teaching them independence and helping them learn how to do things can really help with managing anxiety. Because although it's really scary for them at the beginning, it gradually helps them feel that they're able to develop those skills. So technology is another thing that always needs to be discussed when we're talking about anxiety, because it can be a real huge source of stress for young people, but it is an important part of living in today's world. And so we want young people to be able to use technology, but we want to make sure that it doesn't distress them. So obviously, trying to fit those ideals of having technology in common spaces is using technology in common spaces is ideal. It's not always possible, I know, to do that, but one thing that really is possible to do and is important to do is to really limit screen time for at least an hour before bedtime, because the blue light that's emitted in devices can actually really interfere with sleep patterns because of the melatonin that's comes through with blue light. So even TV devices, sorry kids if you're listening, but an hour before bedtime is when there shouldn't be exposure to that, and that really helps with sleep, which really helps with well-being as well. So one of the things just to be aware of is sometimes people sort of ban technology when something goes wrong, and particularly phones, and kids can often not report a problem with another person's behaviour online because they're worried that then their phone will be banned. So sometimes it's helpful to say to kids, your phone won't be banned, we might have another consequence, but it's really important that if anyone, if there's a problem with what people are saying or doing online, that you need to let me know. And, don't participate in gossip and, negative comments and those sorts of things as well is really important. Make sure that you try and encourage a diversity of interests though, so it's not just a reliance on technology, because they do use technology quite a lot through the day as well, and for schoolwork. So trying to reduce how much time they're just in front of a computer, I say as I'm in front of a computer. Sleep is also a really important part of reducing anxiety as well, because if adolescents need about 8 to 10 hours and children need about 10 to 12, younger children, primary school, need about 10 to 12 hours. It's really, it makes a massive difference on mood, anxiety and learning and concentration, all sorts of things. And then blue light as well. If kids aren't getting enough sleep, all of those things start to drop off. So there's a lot of evidence to say that sleep is actually probably one of the most important things, and it's probably the first thing to go when we're time poor. So you do need to monitor that. Let me know if there's any questions, of course. And another good thing in terms of sleep hygiene is if you can try to have relatively stable patterns of sleep. I know this is really particularly hard when you've got teenagers, but who want to sleep all day on the weekend. If you tend to, try to have really reduced sleep through the week and then catch up on the weekend, that tends to be a less restful sleep than what you are getting if you try to fairly consistently match your sleep patterns through the entire week. It tends to be a little bit more functional for your mood and concentration. So in terms of ways that parents can promote resilience, because getting back to that first concept that we talked about, there are quite a few things that you can do. Growth mindsets, that's one of the things that we do a lot in school with learning, and trying that ability to really persist with things, to see other people and not be threatened by others, but really celebrate their successes, to actually know that we learn through errors and things like that. So the kids are already, we talk a lot about growth mindset in school. There's mindfulness. Actually, learning from criticism is a big one as well from growth mindset, and that's something that some kids really struggle with because they really worry that that's a personal attack on their efforts. Mindfulness skills, that's another really important one to start practicing, not at the time that they're anxious, but actually when doing it every day, and then they actually get skilled at knowing how to relax their mind or calm their mind, so they're just focusing on one thing and not all 50 worries all at the same time. Social skills, because we know interacting positively with others can actually really build resilience as well. Emotion coaching and encouraging empathy, I'll talk about in a minute as well. Setting goals, making sure our parenting style is not kind of smothering, but it's also not too remote either. Encouraging that sense of optimism and hope, and knowing that change is a necessary part of life, and it is going to develop into, anything, nothing can stay stable forever. That's part of life. So mindfulness is, going into it in a little bit more detail, is that it's an awareness of the here and now. So it's not necessarily the same as relaxation. Relaxation is more, mindfulness can have a sort of happy byproduct of relaxation, but its intent is not necessarily about relaxation. It's about trying to not be on autopilot, because our brains there's just so many things going on all the time in the society that we live in. There's just constant thoughts, I need to do that, I need to do this, and it's really hard to be in the moment. So mindfulness is trying to focus on the here and now, not worrying about the past or the future, trying to ground your senses into what you're thinking, into what you're feeling, what you smell, what you see, what you hear, all of that sort of stuff. So that can actually reduce that cognitive load that your brain is experiencing, especially during anxiety. So it's not just for people who are feeling anxious either. It's actually just a really good wellbeing strategy, but it does take practice, because if you're trying to draw on some of those strategies at the time where you're really worried, you're probably not going to be successfully able to do it. So if you're really used to doing that each day, and it can just be 1 or 2 minutes each day, then that can be a really powerful way. So a really easy mindfulness strategy, an example of a mindfulness activity, it might be look around the room, find 5 things that are blue in colour, and then you sort of look around that. Then you might say, okay, now find 4 things that are green, and it doesn't matter what colour and what you're doing, but it's just helping you focus on something different that is fairly easy to do, but it is actually something that you have to search to do. So another mindfulness thing is just sitting exactly where you are, just being aware of the feel of your feet in your socks or in your shoes, the the back of the chair on your back, the seat of the chair and how that feels, any sensations in your body, whether you're feeling hot or cold, your breathing, just noticing. That's all mindfulness really is, noticing your experience in the here and now. So there's quite a few apps that do mindfulness activities, but probably the best known one, and the one that's actually got a lot of research actually behind it, is Smiling Mind. It's a free app, and you just sign up, but you don't get lots of messages or anything. And it has a whole range of mindfulness activities, and some people will find that some are more them and others are not really their cup of tea. So, and they can range in length of time. So some of them are more like 10 minutes and their imagery and things like that. Others are more body, just being an awareness of your body. Others are trying to focus on breathing, those sorts of things. So there's lots of variety in that. So in terms of just reviewing that empathy and helping behaviours kind of thing, just remembering that kids really feel empowered by helping others. And if we can teach them at a young age what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, they're more likely to have empathy and they're more likely to want to help others. And that's a really good thing for their own resilience. So it also makes them feel pretty proud of themselves and increases that sense of accomplishment as well. So connected with that sense of empathy is what we call emotion coaching. Now that's something that it's really helpful for parents to do to help kids learn how to regulate emotions as well. So all kids need some sort of feedback about their feelings and also about their thoughts, and that helps them learn self-control or emotional regulation. So when kids kind of feel empathy from their parent, they actually kind of feel good because they feel understood. It's sort of like, sometimes you just want to debrief about your day. You don't necessarily want any solutions, but you just want, like, you're frustrated and you just need to let it out. Well, kids are no different. So they need someone to listen to and to kind of understand and to go, yeah, that would be, frustrating if that happened. So the key to emotion coaching is that it's most effective in the earlier stages of emotion. So if they're in a full-on tantrum, this is not the time to do emotion coaching because their new brain is not switched on at all. So they're not going to be really listening to what you're saying. So when they are kind of upset about something, but it's not sort of full-blown, then trying to make 3 or 4 statements to show them that you get it. So, you first try to identify the actual emotion. So I'm guessing you're feeling pretty disappointed, for example, or and you can do it for happy or sad emotions or negative or positive emotions. So you can say, I'm guessing you're feeling pretty proud of yourself right now. And it's just about showing them that you get it, that you actually know what it's like for them at the moment. So it's horrible when you feel humiliated, or it's horrible when you feel let down by someone. So it's actually just really connecting with the emotion that they're feeling. Now, some people worry about, if I do that, it's only going to make that emotion bigger. And that makes, I remember when I first heard about it years ago, I was thinking, well, isn't that just going to make it worse? But it actually doesn't. It does the opposite thing, because when someone is listening and they get it, it actually calms you down. And it's quite a fascinating thing to watch, because each time you're showing that you get it and you understand the emotion, you're not necessarily condoning the behaviour, you're just focusing on the emotion first, you actually see them start to calm down, because they're not trying so hard, to convince you that something's unfair, or, that's their perception and that's their experience, and that's okay. It's what they do about it is something different. But first before you kind of go into that problem solving and working out if that behaviour was appropriate or not, first just stick in there with the emotion. Because when they can ride that emotion wave and they kind of start to calm down and, you know, feel that sense of understanding from their parent, it really helps them to re-engage that more logical part of their brain, that thinking part of the brain, because they're not consumed by the emotion. So, you know, then you can deal with the behaviour a bit later, like, you know, after you've sort of seen that their emotions have calmed down, and you can work out, okay, so what do we do about that now? Because this is what's happened, and you're going to probably get a consequence because, you know, whatever you did, the way you reacted to that might have, you know, was not the right thing. But how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And then kids are much more likely to be with you in that situation. So looking at setting goals, I did talk a little bit about that before, about, you know, having sort of that graded exposure to their feared event. So whatever they're fearful of and trying to avoid, how can we gradually build you know, stepping stones to try and get further, you know, closer to facing their fears. And so breaking it down into smaller steps and waiting till they achieve mastery at each of the smaller steps before you move on to the next step. That can be really helpful, and sometimes building in rewards when they achieve that and face their fears can be really helpful. So just focus on one goal at a time. Okay, so problem solving is another part of that, and like I said, you know, problem solving is a higher order thinking task. So doing it in the height of emotion is not going to be a good idea. But there's a nice simple picture in the slideshow of how do you solve a problem. So basically identifying it, looking at all the different alternatives, selecting the best alternative, and then getting them to implement it. Now, as a parent, it's not that you go through that cycle. What you're doing is you're facilitating your child to go through that cycle. So first saying, okay, tell me what the problem is. What are you most worried about? Okay, so what are some possible ways you can deal with that problem? And just get them to brainstorm. And then ask them, well, what do you think is going to be the best one that's going to get you the most positive, most likely to get you the most positive results? And then get them to select it, and then get them to implement it. And then review, like, how did it go? Is that problem still happening? And then what else can you do? And so it's them solving the problem, which helps them develop the skills and also that sense of confidence that they've been able to deal with it. So in terms of just general parenting stuff, you know, trying to have clear expectations and limits for your child, trying to build on their strengths and really acknowledge the positives of what they're doing, and really celebrating their successes when they do manage to deal with their anxiety in a positive way, encouraging that independence and sense that they can do things. Trying to limit reassurance is something that is really hard to do because kids with anxiety are constantly seeking reassurance. But what we know is that the more they are looking to you to get that reassurance, the more reliant and dependent they are on that reassurance, and the more frustrating it is as a parent as well. So what we want to do is just, you know, put it back on them a little bit and say, okay, I've already answered that question. What do you think is the time? Like, how long do you think it is before we leave? You know, so getting them to answer those questions, you know, based on what you've already told them and what you know they already know, but gets them to be their own source of reassurance rather than someone external. One of the terms I quite liked, I know we hear the negative terms of helicopter parenting and things like that. I heard a nice term called be a lighthouse parent. So you're always there, no matter what storms are, you know, and you're always a beacon of light and always there to help, but you don't take over. You're not actually at the helm of the ship. So I quite liked that analogy. But the message we're trying to give kids is that anxiety is okay and they can learn to handle it, and you have faith that they will. But you're always there to help, and, you know, use that positive coping model, like when you are modelling your behaviour and how you have to deal with a difficult situation, model positive coping, because that's where they learn some of those skills from as well. And try not to lose control or let your own frustrations show, which I know can be really difficult when you're dealing with an anxious child. And having that united front with all key adults in their lives is really important as well, including school. So I think they're probably the main kinds of things. I think optimism and hope was one last thing that I was going to talk about, and that's just really that modelling that glass half full approach, and making sure that, you know, we're always seeing what positives might come from that. And I think there's a question, Lisa.
So Georgina said that emotion coaching is tricky when they're teenagers.
Yes.
So have you got any tips for how parents can, or is there a difference between how parents use emotion coaching with, say, a 5 or a 6-year-old versus a teenager?
Yep, it's a really good question, Georgina. Teenagers, they can be tricky because, especially, you know, when mum or dad is saying it, but I think the trick is it's about being genuine as well. Like, so genuinely feeling, because one of the things we do as parents is we say, I can see that you're upset, but, and then we go, why, like we talk about why they perhaps should have reacted differently. So I think what we tend to do is we move to the solution too quickly. And so, you know, like even when I'm working with teenagers, I'm still doing that emotion coaching, but you kind of have to sit with the emotion a little bit longer and just go, yeah, I get it. Like, you know, that must have been really upsetting when so-and-so did that. It really felt unfair, didn't it? And actually you can still do it with teenagers. It's tricky because they, you know, sometimes I think with parents it can be trickier because they, you know, they see they're a bit more dismissive of mum and dad, but I think it's still definitely doable to do, and we just have to be careful that we don't go too quickly to the solution to the problem, and that we sit with the emotion and try and deal with that. Okay, do we have another question
here from
Yep.
Emma? So Emma's asking about the best age to start practicing.
Yeah, well, we do mindfulness at, basically at, you know, 4 and 5 you can do mindfulness. There's some really nice mindfulness activities for young children as well, where, you know, just you can do something at home like a glitter jar. So just, you know, have a jar that's full of water and a few like little canisters of glitter that are popped in, and then get them to shake it up and, you know, just watch the glitter sort of floating down. And that in itself is just a mindfulness activity, just watching how so mindfulness activities can be incredibly simple and require no language at all, and just watching that sort of effect can be quite calming, just like a snow globe. And trying to do some relaxation, body scans and things like that. Just imagine what it feels like. You can do slight little changes in language. For example, imagine there's an elephant sitting on your tummy and it's kind of squishing your tummy, and then sort of relax, and, you know, how does your, you know, what is the sensations in your legs, or your fingers, or your neck, or your head. So there's all sorts of different activities, and that Smiling Mind app has, it's broken up into age groups, so you can actually have different kinds of apps for under, like, sort of that 4 to 6 year old age, and then a little bit sort of older, and each year group as well. So there's definitely, there's not many ages, as long as they can understand language. But as I say, you know, doing even like a glitter jar is not based on language at all. So definitely no real limits on age there. And Georgina, I can see that you were just saying more about a change of language then for teenagers with emotion coaching. Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, you don't have to be as break up the emotions as much and really, help them understand the emotions, but the language can be a little bit more complex, I guess, with older kids. One thing I did want to show you is that there's this book called Hey Warrior. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, and it's hard to read it on the screen, but the author is Karen Young, and it's a really great book on anxiety that I think is actually useful for any age. It looks like a picture book, and it looks like it's written for little primary kids, but it's possibly a little bit complex for kindergarten in terms of what the words are, but I think if you're rereading it a few times, it can be really good. It kind of explains, and it can actually be quite good for stage 4 kids as well. It's probably the concepts, even though year 9 probably looks too babyish, it's more about what it looks like than what it actually, the information contained in there is really good. It explains the role of the amygdala, which is in the brain, and how that is a self-protective, that's where your anxiety is coming from, and it's actually your brain's desire to protect your body from danger. And it really explains what actually happens, all those physical symptoms I was talking about that happen when you experience high levels of anxiety. It explains it really well. So it's Hey Warrior. I don't have any shares in it, so but I just think it's really well explained, and it's really lovely illustrations and things like that. So that can be a really good book for all ages, actually. So I've certainly worked with teenagers where we've used it, and they do find it helpful to understand what's actually happening with anxiety. So I think I'm just checking to see if there's anything else in there. Oh, look, I think, wow, you speak and it happens. There's a little picture showing the book on the Facebook site. So that's my recommendation there. If you have any other questions, on that second last slide or third last slide, there's my email address as well, and you can still do a couple of questions for the last couple of minutes before we go offline. There's also some online anxiety management resources and apps, so that's why we gave you the link as a Google document rather than a PDF, so you can actually click on those links directly, and there's some useful resources of phone lines and things like that. Yes, thanks, Rebecca. There's a good comment there about Hey Warrior. It's a fantastic book for adults as well as kids. I totally agree. I think it's really helpful for all ages. So as I said, it looks like it's for kids, but it's actually for all ages. What else? There's a couple of fact sheets as well. There's links to those fact sheets. So, feel free to click on any of those links and find out a little bit more. So, that's a nice comment from Trish at the end. Love our school. Well, we love it too. So I think that brings us to the end of our Facebook Live session. I'm happy to have not gone over time because I tend to go over.
Well done. No, we don't have a lot of questions, and I think that's probably because you explained everything so well. But if you do, Anoushka's provided her email there for you, and of course you're always welcome to contact us at school. I really liked your explanation of the body's physiological response to anxiety, and I think you've given our families some really helpful tips to cope with anxiety. So thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Thank you to our families for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Facebook Live.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you. Have a good evening.